Garden of Eden, the 5 rivers, and the tree of life, and all the things that are a part of that we have been excluded from because of sin. And one of those images is water, the water of life. Now, the interesting thing is you can make a whole study of just looking at the different ways water is used and rivers are used throughout the scriptures to designate this idea of life and peace and connection and how that fits in. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that connection this morning. And we're going to use this, one of the last verses here in Revelation chapter 22, verse 17. And the Spirit of the bride say, "Come," and let the one who hears say, "Come." And let the one who is thirsty come. And let the one who wishes to take the water of life without cost. I want to talk to you about this idea of thirsty for a moment. On the western coast of Africa is on the edge or the border there, which is Namibia. If you're not familiar with this area, it's not one of those areas we often talk about, but Namibia is actually one of the most beautiful places you can imagine, but it is also one of the most hostile. This is the Namibian coast. And you can see that the desert, the dunes, which are the largest dunes in the world, come right to the edge of the South Atlantic Ocean. Very unusual landscape. And the weather here is very unusual in that annually there is less than 1 inch of rainfall per year in this area. Is that not working? Did it break it? I broke it. Working now. I tell you what, he gets near it, it just gets fixed. But there's less than 1 inch of rain. We've gotten an inch of rainfall in the last few hours, haven't we? Probably. Maybe. At least overnight. They don't get that much in a year here in Namibia. This particular area where the dunes are especially high and the desert is especially dry is one of the most dangerous places in the world for sailors. Because if you were for some reason to, and this is in the day before powered boats, if you were to row or sail onto this beach, most likely you'd never get off because of the wind, because of the waves, and because of the surf. The surf now makes it one of the destination spots for people that surf, the surf kind of thing. But in the ancient mariners, there's more than 1,000 shipwrecks that have been documented in this stretch of beach. It is so dangerous. Here's a quiz. Let's see if anybody can answer the question. Does anybody know what this little stretch of the Namibian coast is called? It's called the Skeleton Coast. Now, it is incredibly beautiful, but once you get on it, you can't get off. And there is no water, not for more than 100 miles inland. The animals that live in this desert they're especially adapted to being able to utilize the fog that comes in off the water, but doesn't stay. Now I want you to picture for a minute that you are stranded on this beach. What do you need probably more than anything? Right? What is it? Water. But wait a minute. There are billions, if not trillions, of gallons of water right next to you. What's the problem? It's poison. Did you know that? I hope you did, because if you drink it, this is what happens. Drinking seawater, salt water. These are the effects of this. This is well documented because of people that have been in shipwrecks in the Navy, of sailors that have been stranded and floating in the water, if you think of the story of the USS Indianapolis, and that they left those sailors in the water for almost 5 days. In shark-infested waters, 900 went into the water, but only 300 came out. Most people associate that with the shark attacks, but in truth, most of them probably died because they drank the salt water, began to hallucinate, shrugged off their life vests, and drowned. You know, this is a problem throughout the world, is that you'll find places where there is no drinkable water. Even though they're right next to this huge body of water, 2/3 of the surface of the earth, or something like that, 3/5 of the surface of the earth is water. Shouldn't we drink it? No, it will kill you. But yet some people do. Now, I want to talk about a little bit of a solution to this. And it uses this really funny word, osmosis. Osmosis means, of course, and I'm no chemistry major here, but if you go from a high concentration to a low concentration through some type of a membrane. And so you get, if you have high salt on the left side and low salt on the right side, the salt will eventually migrate and it'll all be salty. But there is a way to change that, and it's called reverse osmosis. Isn't that a cool name? But it requires high pressure, and it requires a special membrane that only allows the water molecules to go through. The salt molecules, which are larger, get caught in the membrane and can't pass through it. Because using the system, you can change salt water into fresh. Now, there's a number of ways that people have utilized this. Let me show you 2 examples. One of them, well, both of them popped up, but that's all right. The one on the right, the big one, the right, okay, I figured it out. The one on the right is actually a reverse osmosis plant that is located in Saudi Arabia, because most of the water in Saudi Arabia is derived from this process. It is extremely energy inefficient, but they have lots of stuff called oil, and they don't care. So they burn power plants, and those power plants power these massive plants that turn seawater into drinkable water. I spoke to AR about this a little bit, and he knew where the plants were located and said that some of the pipes that come out of these plants are 4 or 5 feet across that provide water to their cities and communities. The one on the left is made by a company called Katadyn. I'm actually pretty familiar with them. I've been following that company for a while. And they make this little dude for lifeboats. That's a handle there that you pump. Now I want you to picture this for a minute. If you pump that handle, and it's not easy, for an hour, you get about that much water. But believe me, if you're stranded out in the ocean and the only thing you've got is that little guy, that's going to seem precious, isn't it? To be able to change something that's toxic to something that is absolutely vital for our life. And it comes through this process called reverse osmosis. I'm going to tell you, I believe that there is a spiritual lesson in this little bit of science, and we're going to talk about it briefly. Because the book of Revelation ends with a warning. I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If anyone adds to them, God will add to him the plagues which are written in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God will take his part from the tree of life and from the holy city which are written in this book. This warning is, I think, 2 verses from the very end. And it shouldn't be an unfamiliar warning. We're going to look at a couple of other examples, including the one that was read to us, that was spoken by Jesus. But it is a warning. It is a warning that says, do you know that there are things that you can do that will take away the promise of what this book has meant to you, the promise of heaven and the promise of hope and the promise of peace, promise of a place where there is no more tears. But this is how to do it. But I want you to look into this. I testify to everyone that hears. No one excluded from this. Who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. And what is the warning? If anyone adds to them, and if anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, and I have labeled, for the purposes of this illustration, spiritual salt water, spiritual seawater, right here. It'll kill you, spiritually. Is that warning clear? I would believe so. But I'm also not the one necessarily that's dying of thirst. Because a lot of people drink exactly that. They see what is out there in the vast, pardon the pun, ocean of culture and religion out there, and they just take a big swig. What I'm telling you is that when it says to everyone, he is speaking to each one of us. Each individual one of us needs to make a choice. What are you going to drink? That's what we're going to talk about. Matthew 7. Jesus is finishing up his sermon, and it is a sermon. Jesus speaking in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. It has a beginning, an introduction. It has a thesis statement. It has almost has 3 bullet points, almost. And it does have a conclusion and invitation. This is part of that conclusion and invitation. As he says, enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow. The King James read straight here. I believe the version that was read said difficult. Was that the word that was the word choice? I think it was. That leads to life, and there are few who find it. Do we understand what Jesus is describing here? Is that we have to make a choice and put some effort into this idea of finding the way, the narrow that leads to life here, the straight, S-T-R-E-I-G-H-T, is the idea of a nautical term, of a narrow channel, passageway that a ship must carefully navigate to stay safe, or it will run into the rocks or run into the sandbar. The passage, the entrance, is not exactly, is not the widest thing in the world. Y'all remember the song, Let the Lower Lights Be Burning? Have you ever sung? It's an old hymn. Do you know what that's written about? Come on, Dingy, do you know what that's written about? Cleveland. Did you know that? The entrance to the harbor in Cleveland, off the Great Lakes there, is one of the most treacherous pieces of water because of the weather on the Great Lakes, and it's rocky on both sides. And they have a huge lighthouse on one side and a smaller one on the other, and that would mark the entrance to the harbor. And if one of those lights went out, the lower lights, you couldn't see which side you were supposed to go on. There was a number of historical shipwrecks and people that died because they missed it and the lighthouse went out. That is narrow. That is straight. That's the idea. This is the warning by Jesus. This is what we are challenged with. Keep going. And he goes and he talks about danger, warning. There's only 2 times that this word is used in the Sermon on the Mount. One of them is when he begins in chapter 6 and says, beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be seen of them. And here he says, beware of false prophets who look like sheep, but in truth are wolves. What I want you to see is the word beware, the word danger. This is a powerful word, is it not? We have words like poison and toxic. Sometimes when I think about this word, I envision the one opportunity I got in my life to tour a nuclear ballistic missile submarine, USS Pennsylvania. Now, I want you to just picture this for a minute. This is a boat that sinks. Not the most comforting thing to think about. Number 2, it is powered by a nuclear reactor. Not something I am terribly familiar with and has just a little bit of scariness all by its lonesome, doesn't it? But then you step into the missile room, into what they call Sherwood Forest, and you're facing 24 tubes, the length of this room, each one about 5 feet across. And on top of each one of those is 8 to 10 nuclear weapons. In other words, you're standing in a room with about 200 nuclear warheads on a boat that sinks. It's powered by a nuclear reactor. I went through that place like this. I didn't want to touch anything. I'm just going to be I'm going to be really careful. I literally went through the boat like that. Let me tell you what, they didn't have to say it too loud for me. Beware, danger of people that will fool you. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Do you know who he's talking to? He's talking to us. Not everyone that makes a confession. Oh, I'm this, I'm that, whatever. Do you do what we know to be right? Do we do what we know is in the Scriptures? I mean, it's a basic concept, isn't it? But he has to emphasize this to the people that he's speaking to. Not everyone, but he who does the will of my Father. And he says it in such graphic terms at the end, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Practice lawlessness. That's the danger, to ignore what is the truth. And then my favorite. We're not going to do the whole thing. But would everyone please, just for a moment, get out your rocks or your building. Ready? Wise man built his house upon the rock. There you go. See there? Everybody knows that. House upon a rock. And we have this beautiful illustration of 2 possibilities. One is building it on the sand, in which the building falls. And that's the way he ends this lesson. If you don't, and the description is not about construction or foundations or anything else. It is about this statement. Hears these words of mine and either acts or doesn't act upon them. So what are we going to do? What do all this mean? Whether we're talking about Revelation 22, Matthew 7, we have a choice. What are we going to do? And I'm still stuck on that beach. What am I going to do? Am I willing to say, that water looks fine to me. Take a drink. Or do I keep pumping my little Katadine reverse osmosis machine and put forth the personal, individual effort. I want you to think about that. You got to go, I mean, it comes out almost in drops as you pump the handle on that thing, because it takes such high pressure, about 800 psi, out of that little device to force that water through that tiny little membrane and to say, I want to live. That should be the motivation of pumping on that handle. Even though you're facing miles and hundreds of miles of ocean. Timothy. In 2 Timothy, I believe somebody mentioned this in class today. For time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate to themselves teachers according to their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth, and will turn aside to myths. One of many warnings found throughout the Scriptures. But I'm going to tell you what this is, and I want you to think about it this way. Spiritual salt water, spiritual seawater. It's easy. Pick something you want. Pick something you like. Pick something that's fancy. Pick something that appeals to you and drink that. Or make the choice to put the effort in. From Galatians 1, I'm amazed that you are so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Christ for a different gospel, which is really not another. Only there are some who are disturbing you who want to distort the gospel of Christ. That's one choice. Here's the other choice. Put in the effort. Put on the pressure. Make the choice. Are we willing to force our thinking and our lives through this tiny little membrane that only allows or will allow the truth of God's word to come through? The truth that leads to life. And this is personal. I mentioned the USS Indianapolis. It is one of the most tragic events in naval history. The Indianapolis sailed from San Francisco to Hawaii and then to a small island called Tinian. And on board were the parts for the very first atomic bomb, because they were going to assemble it on Tinian, and that's where it was loaded onto the Enola Gay to fly over Hiroshima. But this mission was so secret, the Indianapolis didn't know what to do after it delivered the parts, so it went, I'm going to go join the fleet. But no one knew where or when it was supposed to arrive, and it stumbled across a Japanese submarine and was torpedoed. It sank in 12 minutes. There were over 1,000 sailors on board. And nobody knew it was missing. 900 ended up in the water. The story, if you ever want to read it, is fascinating, but there were people that pleaded, stay together, stay where they could take care of the wounded and take care of the people. And day one rolled by and they were in the sun. And day two, about that time the sharks showed up. But there were people that just decided to quit. And they shrugged off their life vests and sank. There were some that said, oh, don't you know that about 40 feet down in the water there is a pool, there is a pocket of fresh water. Let's go get that. And they would dive down and never come back up. But there were 300 of them that never gave in, that never stopped hoping, that never stopped looking. An American seaplane spotted them and landed 5 days after the sinking. And the only thing that the pilots and the crew of the airplane could do was begin to haul these men up on the plane. They actually ruined the aircraft. They put their hands and feet through the fabric that covered the plain, but it didn't matter. They were calling on the radio for anybody to come and help rescue these people. But they were the ones that didn't drink the water. Isn't that a simple thing? You know, I don't think we appreciate this in the United States. We have such an abundance of this stuff. Go out to California. They charge you arm and a leg for this stuff. But right now, I could open this up and slake my thirst. Great stuff. Of course, this is something I could also do. It's my choice. Do I dare drink it now? Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them may be compared to the wise man. Of course, this is the passage that we've seen and talked about so many times about all scriptures inspired by God and is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for training in righteousness, that the man may be equipped, adequate. This is New American Standard. They use the word adequate. I much preferred the old King James that used the word perfect. We have everything. Equipped for every good work. And I think of my little tiny reverse osmosis thing. Because it's not only going to keep me alive, but maybe the person next to me. If that's in my tool bag, that I know I need to filter what the world tells me and pump hard to get what is pure. So let's end with the invitation of Revelation. Let anyone who is thirsty come. Let the one who wishes to take the water of life without cost. The Spirit and the bride say, come. And let the one who hears say, come. I didn't tell Adam to do it, but it was so appropriate. First song we began with was, come. Now is the time to worship. If it's your time to choose the pure water of life, make the choice that you won't accept anything else. How can we help you? There is some way. Why don't you let us know while we stand and sing?